METZIA Daf Yomi Bet. Faith and Despair, Yosh Middat. We're starting a new Perek, Yomi METZIA, the Perek that every beginner child starts learning Gemara. Yomi METZIA is very often the starting Perek, the chapter with which they begin. And Yomi METZIA deals with how, it's quite a strange thing when you think of it, how ownership transfers to a person who finds lost property. At the end of that, I pick up lost property, you're talking about a situation where I'm allowed to keep it, and we'll see there are cases where I'm allowed to keep it, cases where I'm not allowed to keep it. But if it's a case where I am allowed to keep it, how does that ownership transfer from the person who owned it before to me? What is the process? What is the methodology? And to understand it, we'll use a Rashi in Psochim that we reference on Daf Yudalad that the Brisker Rov brought. We'll use the Ktsos HaChoshen and Reb Shimon Shkop to understand the process in a very beautiful way that Reb Shimon Shkop teaches. And then we'll apply it to life, particularly in our times, and some of the skills we need to be able to navigate the times in which we're living. There are psukim in Parshas Ki Tetzei where we learn the obligation to return lost property. In those psukim it says, V'chein ta'aseh l'chamaro, v'chein ta'aseh l'simlato. One of the things specifically mentioned, other than the general rule of returning lost property, is for clothing. And the Gemara learns on a little bit further in the Perek that clothing, a simla, is mentioned because clothing always has a siman. There's some kind of way that the owner can identify the clothing. If it's something they've worn, there'll be a mark on it, there'll be some wear and tear on it. Even if it's a new item, it was very often custom tailored for them. They didn't mass produce in those days. So they will be able to give you some indicator to assure you that this is theirs. And that we learn from simlato. The importance of having a siman, of being able to identify the property that you've lost, is in that you don't give up hope if you've lost it, because you believe if somebody picks it up, I will be able to identify it and I will be able to get it back. If what you lose is a generic object that you can give no simanim for, you lose a coin, you lose a $100 note, there's no way that you can give any proof that that was yours, and you tend to give up hope. That giving up of hope, and we'll refine the definition of hope, is called yeush. Yeush is a word that we use both in halakha, in this area in Yomi METZIA, which is giving up hope of ownership, of ever being able to find something again. And yeush is something we'll talk about in life, despair. You give up hope. What does that mean when we give up hope? And we'll talk about it today in both of those contexts. The Gemara talks about yeush shelo middat, and the Gemara says, on this question of yeush shelo middat, what happens if a person has given up hope but subconsciously, not even consciously? Abaya amar lo avi yesh, v'Rava amar yesh. Abaya and Rava are very old friends of the core Amoraim of the Talmud, of the Gemara. Abaya and Rava have two different views, as they often do. Abaya says it's not valid despair, and Rava says it is. The Gemara goes on to explain, B'davar sheyesh bo siman, if you're talking about something that is identifiable by a specific mark on it, that clearly is not despair, because the person holds on to the possibility that it will be found and they will be able to identify it. And even if you find out ultimately that he did give up hope, so you find the golden Rolex that we talked about, and it's got his initial on the back of it. So you pick it up and you think this is something nobody's giving up hope on. They're going to find it again. You take it home, and you're hoping that nobody asks for it. You're hoping that there's no way that you'll ever find the owner. And you eventually hear that the owner actually said, you know what, I'm never going to find it. But at the time you got it, he hadn't yet given up hope. When he realized it fell off his wrist, he didn't give up hope because he knows his initials on the back of it. He says to himself, there's a siman, there's an initial. I'll get it back in that case. And therefore, when I got it, B'Yisurahu da'ataliyadeh, says the Gemara. At the moment I picked it up with the intention of not returning it to the owner, that's B'Yisur, that's a kind of a gazela. And therefore it doesn't become mine through that. There has to be an actual giving up of hope, and that only applies with the subconscious giving up of hope only applies with something generic that has no identifiable mark on it, but if it has an identifier mark, yeush doesn't apply until he actually does the yeush, he actually physically gives up hope. How does that idea of giving up hope work? So on Daf Yudalit, we spoke about the Rashi in Psochim that the Briskerov brought in another reference in Hilchos Shchenim, where Rashi talks about the fact that you can own something but not have it birshuto. And if it's not birshuto, even though you own something, if it's not under your authority, you can't be makdish it and you can't sell it, you can't do anything with it. Being birshuto means being able to use it, being able to affect change with it or over it. But if it's not birshuto, even though technically you own it, legally you own it, but you don't have authority over it, that ownership is pretty useless. So when somebody realizes he's lost the golden Rolex and he's unlikely to ever find it again, he realizes, although technically I'm the owner, it's no longer in my reshut. I no longer have authority over it. If I can't do anything with it, I can't use it to tell the time, I can't sell it, I can't be makdish it, I can't do anything with it. It's not birshuti, but it's mine, I own it. Yes, you own it, you've got a certificate of ownership, but it's not birshutcha. The Tzos HaChoshen, in explaining, the Ramban explains that there's this giving up of reshut is very important, because if somebody else has picked it up, let's say it does have a siman, his initials are on the back of the Rolex, then the person who's picked it up at that time really has the function of a shomer. He doesn't have the function of just a strange person. He's actually a trustee, because he's going to give it back to the person. The person's going to come looking for it. He has an identifying mark on it. His initials are on the back of it. So he's like a trustee. And therefore, it is still in the reshut of the owner. And that's how Reb Shimon Shkop understands the Tzos HaChoshen, who's explaining the Ramban, that at the end of the day, if I've picked up this golden Rolex and it has your initial on it, I'm holding it for you. It's not mine, it's not nobody's, it's not hefker, it's still yours, and it's birshutcha, because I am your trustee, I'm acting on your behalf. So as long as there's that possibility, I can't say, well, I'm going to keep it, put it in my pocket, I'm not going to tell anybody about it. That would be gezela, that would be a form of theft, I'm not permitted to do that. So we get an idea of how far this idea of reshut goes. Reb Shimon Shkop explains it further and says, but that's not enough. Just to say that when I realize that the golden Rolex is no longer under my control, it's no longer in my authority. Yes, it technically belongs to me. I bought it, I paid for it, it's registered, whatever, but there's no way I can recover it. At that moment, Reb Shimon Shkop proves it's not that it becomes hefker, because then our Gemara would make no sense. The thought that it could become hefker subconsciously. You don't see thought functioning that way in halakha. When thought is effective in halakha, says Reb Shimon Shkop, it has to be real thought, deliberate thought. It's not assumed thought. So you can't just assume he's probably given up hope, but maybe he doesn't even know he's lost it yet. Their thought wouldn't work. So Reb Shimon Shkop proves that the idea of yeush, giving up hope of recovering control over your own article, over your own object, is not only that I give up control. He touches here on just the goodness of human nature, that part of what you're saying, in effect, is, I'm not going to find my Rolex again, it's gone. I hope a deserving person finds it. I hope a good person finds it and enjoys it for the rest of their lives. That's the way a person is meant to think about something he's let go of. When you've really let go, it's not just that you've let go, this is no longer mine. You've let go and it's somebody else's, and that's fine too. I'm okay with that. There's somebody else who's in my place. That's really it's a beautiful idea of Reb Shimon. I'm sure we'll reference it again later on in the Perek. This idea that yeush does not only mean I let go, in letting go, I'm actually gifting it to whoever finds it. So there's a transfer taking place. There's not just a removal of ownership taking place. There's actually a transfer of ownership that's taking place. What's important to appreciate is that in the idea of yeush, of giving up hope of control and realizing that this is no longer mine, although technically, legally it's mine, it's not in my control, I have no authority over it, and therefore if somebody finds it, that they're welcome to use it. We can only do that with things that we have control over. If I have control, I can grant that to you. But I can't grant it to you or even give up on it if I never had it in the first place. You can only give up on what was yours, not on what was not yours. There's the famous case Rabbi Chachon Spector, the great Rov in Kovna, the Posek in Kovna, where there was a couple who were very poor. And they talked to her, they said, what are we going to do? How are we going to get out of this hole of poverty? And they decide, what people seem to do is they save up a lot of money, and when they've saved up a lot of money, they go to Leipzig to the fair, and they buy schora, they buy goods there, and then they go to the small villages and they sell the goods that they've bought for a profit, and that keeps them going for a year. Let's do that. So they save up every little penny, and they borrow from friends, and they put together an amount of money, and the wife goes off to Leipzig, the husband's sitting and learning, the wife goes off to Leipzig to buy some goods at the fair. She gets the goods, and she comes to the cashier to pay for the goods, and she puts her hands into her bag to pull out the purse, and the purse is gone. And she breaks down and she's crying, and what has happened? This is our life savings. This is everything we've got. How will I face my husband? What will I do? She's in a total state of being. At that moment, she hears on the other side of the fair somebody saying a Shechianu out loud. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam, Shechianu v'kiyamanu v'gianu l'zman hazeh. I've become rich. I've found a whole bag full of money. She says, Baruch Hashem. She runs over to him and she says, well, it's actually my money and I can give you a siman and so on. He says, it was your money. It's not your money anymore. She says, no, it was my money. It's still my money. He says, haven't you learned Eili Metzius? Haven't you learned this parak of Talmud that we're learning now? Every child knows this parak. That if you lose money in a place where there are lots of people walking around, and many of them non-Jews who don't know and aren't bound by the laws of Bava Metzia, you give up hope. So I'm entitled to assume that you gave up hope when you realized the money was lost and you had no intention of recovering it again, and therefore it's mine. She says, look, I'm not giving up on this money. It's too important to me. Let's go to Rabbi Chachon and ask a shaila. He says, how can you trouble the Godel Hador with a shaila that any cheder child will tell you? That's a Mefurish Mishnah in Eili Metzius. If you lose money in a public place where lots of non-Jews and Jews are walking around, you assume you're not going to get it back. Everybody knows that. She says, still, I want to go to Rabbi Chachon. And they go to Rabbi Chachon, and Rabbi Chachon asks her story, his story, and he says, if the money was hers, you would be right. She gave up hope. But the money was the husband's. She was simply a shaliach. She was just a messenger. And he gave her the rights to use the money, not to give up hope on the money. He didn't give her that right. She doesn't have that level of ownership. She has no right to give up that. So you've got to return the money to her. Everybody got excited. So the story is very well known. What I did, I just came across a little booklet that was produced. It was published only a year ago. Maybe it was republished a year ago. It's called Kovetz Divrei Chizuk, words of encouragement, and put together various essays. The first essay is by Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky. He was a wonderful Baal Mussar and a darshan, died only about 10 years ago. Remember, he came to visit us in Johannesburg once. Wonderful darshan. And he tells the second part of the story. The second part of the story is Rabbi Yerucham walks into the Beis HaMedrash in Mir and he sees everybody's excited. What's going on? Did you hear Rabbi Chachon's psak? It's unbelievable. It's such a chiddush. It's amazing. And they're talking about him out, and he gets them together and he says, yes, but you've got to take that further, and you've got to realize that Ribono Shel Olam has given us all talents and gifts and various resources. He's given us those talents and gifts and resources to do things with, to improve the world with, to serve him with. He hasn't given us those resources to despair with. We don't have the right to ever despair. We don't have the right to ever give up hope on something which doesn't belong to us in the first place. And that's something that's very, very beautiful. And the Chazon Ish uses a similar idea to explain in Emunah V'Tochen, the second parak. He talks about, what did Yosef do wrong? When stuck in jail, he has an opportunity. He has the ear of the minister of butlery in Egypt. He has the opportunity to talk to a cabinet minister about his fate. And he says to him, when you get back, tell the king about me. Just mention me to the king. What's so terrible about that? That's hishtadlus. You're trying your bit. The Chazon Ish says that's an act of despair, not an act of hishtadlut. That's not effort. That's despair. To ask a politician for help is an act of despair, because if it's in his interests, he'll help you without you asking him. And if it's not in his interests, he won't help you even if you do ask him. So what are you asking him for? So it's a useless action. Ishtadlus is when you do something that is useful. To do something that is useless is an act of despair, not an act of ishtadlus. That's how the Chazon Ish resolves the whole issue around Yosef. Bitochen and hope are different. Giving up hope and giving up on bitochen are two different things, by the way. What's the difference between hope and bitochen? You get onto a plane and you fly from London to New York. You don't do that if you hope the plane will make it. You do that if you trust the plane will make it. You can have hope and despair at the same time. Hope is kind of, who knows? Yesterday at the tragic funeral of Doron Perez's son, he said, until now, we were held together by hope, and we've lost that. That's hope, but deep down they knew the chances are it's not very likely. You can still hold on to hope. Bitochen is not something you hold on to. Bitochen is something you act on, you trust on. It's an assumption, it's a certainty. And Yosef had given up on that certainty. Yes, he had hopes. Ask the Saramashkim, and you have hope that he'll remember you. This is not about hope. Bitochen is not about hope. Bitochen is about trust, which is much more than hope. But you're not allowed to give up trust. You're not allowed to give up bitachon on something that isn't ours to start with. So yes, in the matters of commercial laws of finding lost property, the owner gives up and understands, I no longer have control. If I no longer have control over this, I can't use it. If I can't use it, I hope somebody else at least gets it. I hope at least somebody uses it, that it doesn't go to waste completely, that somebody enjoys my golden Rolex. And a person does that, and he gifts it, so to say, to the finder, and that's how the property is transferred. But when it comes to something that isn't yours, like in the case of Rabbi Chonon, the husband the wife whose money it was not, she doesn't have the right to give up hope. And in the same way, we don't have the right to give up hope on ourselves. We don't have the right to give up hope on each other because we never owned ourselves and we don't own each other in the first place. We can't give up hope. We can't give up hope about Eretz Yisrael, about the future of Eretz Yisrael and peace in Eretz Yisrael. We can't give up trust in that because it's not ours to give up. And we've been given Eretz Yisrael to do certain things with. We were not given Eretz Yisrael to give up on. And it's our responsibility each day during these difficult times, not just to hold on to hope, but to trust in the fullness of Hashem's intention to navigate us through this time in whatever way He deems best for us all and best for the future of the Jewish people and of humanity, and to trust that at the end this will lead us to where we need to come.